So thank you, everybody. Welcome to the very first speaker session of Collaboration City. My name is Joyce Lai. I'm the founder of the Real Mamas community and also now Collaboration City. So Collaboration City is a network of professionals with intergenerational thinking, and the city's founding residents are all mothers from the Real Mamas community. So today we have two very special people with us to chat about what they're doing. We have John D'Agostino, who is the head of strategy for Coinbase Institutional. I know many of you probably know him already. And we also have Dalia D'Agostino, who is John's daughter. She is the creator of the Children's Financial Network, which is a series which helps bridges the gap in understanding between kids and complex financial topics. So normally I would go in no particular order, but today we're going to go with our more esteemed guest. And so we're going to start with Dalia. So Dalia, tell us about yourself. How old are you? What grade are you in? Tell us a little bit about you.
13. I'm in seventh grade, and some things I like to do. I really like acting, and I'm taking like a boot camp for that right now. So I like theater and that stuff.
Awesome. Really cool. So I was doing some research about John and prepping for this conversation here. I learned that your dad actually makes you make Claude apps and then distribute them to your friends. Is that true?
Yeah, we use Claude a lot in our house, and I really like making games, and we can make games for pretty much anything. I use it to study for tests, and he likes it when I give them to my friends so they can study too. It's pretty great.
I mean, I'm sure I think makes is a strong word. I mean, encourages. Maybe it's encourages. I like encourages.
Well,
Yeah,
you did call yourself Pasta Dad. So,
that's the Italian version of Tiger Mom. For those of you wondering, that's my phrase. Yeah, yeah. The
yeah.
first one's tough, and then they make them on their own now.
And so, what is an example of what you have been encouraged to make and how has it been helpful for you?
So I'm studying for the SHSAT right now, which is like the admissions test for the specialized high schools. A lot of my studying has come from Claude. And for example, I actually recently made this like game where it was like one of those jumping games where I had to jump over obstacles, and every few seconds it would pause me and have me like identify a math formula from that comes from the test. And if I get it wrong, I restart the game. If I get it right, I just keep going.
Wow, that's really cool. I wouldn't, did you think of that yourself?
Partially, my dad obviously gave gave me the starting idea for a game, but we like to discuss ideas.
Yeah, I'm not sure about you, Joyce, but like I remember always growing up, I had problems remembering rote formulas. And so one of the byproducts of all the work we've been doing and all the amazing stuff Dalia's been doing is we have Claude track and an error log. So what are the questions she's getting wrong? And then producing lots of these questions was like she didn't know the formula. Area, the volume of a sphere, whatever the formula is. And so Claude kept building this list of all the formulas she would need to know. And at one point I looked at it, I'm like, I can't remember all this. It's crazy. And so, there's mnemonic devices, there's things we are like foil, we remember first times first out of it. But now we have this tool that she can build a game that she actually enjoys that helps her create a memory of that particular formula, which hopefully will resonate.
Wow, I love that so much. Yeah, I think it's really amazing. I remember back in my days when I was growing up, the like cool device to have were these dictionaries, like electronic dictionary, like
Yeah,
ones where you can like scan the word or something and it'll just tell you the definition. But that was really the end of it. So, in addition to building apps, clearly you spend a lot of time thinking about financial topics as well. And you had mentioned to me the inspiration for Children's Financial Network came from a observation that the kids weren't really understanding things, I think, as well as they probably should, right? So can you speak to what you observed and what was the gap and how you plan to address it?
I conducted a survey, obviously with help of my dad, and we got over 200 parents and kids that were able to survey, and it was a pretty simple survey just about financial literacy and what you learn in your house. And what I found was that most kids, I think about like 80 to 90% of kids, thought that their parent didn't teach the topics in a way they could understand, which is one of their main problems when it came to why they didn't want to learn or didn't know certain financial literacy topics. But when we looked at the parents' results, we realized that most parents actually didn't say that they're not explaining it right to their kids. So I feel like I saw that there was like a gap between what parents think they're teaching and what kids are actually getting from it. So the biggest point, honestly, of my show is to fill that gap and tell parents how to explain it in a way kids can actually understand.
So you're in a room full of parents. How would you advise them to teach these topics to their kids?
I feel like it's obviously different for every kid. Everyone learns differently, but a lot of it is using things that kids can relate to. Obviously, you have to kind of teach it slowly. You can't put these big topics on them so quickly. But it's really just using things they can understand. Like I know like squishies are popular for. What I like to do lots of times in my shows, I like to use things that are really popular with kids and kind of like metaphors and explaining these things to them in ways they'll understand with stuff they use.
Tell them the one you came up with for sunk cost fallacy. I thought that was awesome.
For sunk cost fallacy, basically, so if you have a plan to go to an amusement park and something you're really excited for, and then you realize that it's going to be raining like thunder the entire day, but you go anyway because you don't want to lose the money, or you pay for the tickets, you don't want to lose that money. Basically, you go there, you don't have fun, half the rides are closed because of the thunder, get completely soaked, and you spend money on food anyway. So the idea that I had to go to the amusement park because you already bought the tickets, even though it wasn't going to be an enjoyable experience, and you're going to spend more money there, that kind of shows how sunk cost, even if what's dead is dead, the money that you spend is already spent. But if you're preventing yourself from having a bad time or spending more money, it's not a waste.
That is really true. And I agree that's actually a concept that I think even a lot of adults have a hard time processing, right? I think, after I became more involved in like the finance field, right? You come to realize that an option to do something, it in itself has a value. So another way to think about that is, you bought a ticket, you had the option to go, you just choose not to, and that's okay, right? That's a totally perfect decision. Very good. Okay, so another thing I wanted to ask you, I have two more questions for you, Dalia, before we hop on over to your dad. Your dad mentioned in his other interviews that he wants to teach you to think about like future value properly and what is good risk and what is bad risk. So can you tell us how you think about that? What is good risk to you at your age and what is bad risk?
Well, I'll kind of tell like story almost. I get money because I volunteer at camp over the summer and I get tips. And when I save about 70% of that money, and how I like to invest that money. And what I've learned a lot about investing, and like for example, this is like example good risk, bad risk. Investing in one stock, for example, is something that I've learned. Lots of time is bad risk, and because it is likely that your money is going to go down. Your money might go up, but it's most likely that your money is not going to. It's going to decrease, and it's really and it's really bad. What I like to do with my money is I like to put it in ETFs, or exchange traded funds, and I like those because it's very low risk compared to investing in one stock. And though it is low reward, how I like to think about it is because I have so much time until I actually am going to need that money, and I have like 10 years till I'm actually going to want to take it out. That money is likely to just go up over time. And I also really like ETFs, especially because stocks lots of times give out dividends, and instead of like getting them back in cash, like usually like they get reinvested. And I talk a lot about like compounding interest, but that's just another way that like your money will compound and your investment will.
And what is on your reading list, Dalia?
When I think about reading, I'm talking about it in like 3 categories. There's like reading for fun, which is just what you want to read for fun, and it doesn't necessarily have to be educational. There's reading for like school, which is like obviously required. And then there's reading for like individual learning or independent learning that you don't do part of school. So for fun reading, I really like horror books, and I find them really interesting. And for school reading, I like realistic fiction, nonfiction, stuff we read in school. And for independent learning, I feel like I go less for books, and I know we talked about like how I use Claude. I also use like Gemini, and I think when I'm doing independent learning, instead of going for a paper book, that I like to gather the information from everywhere on the internet, and I think Claude and Gemini and those tools are really good tools to do that.
So what I learned that is when Dalia turns 18, maybe she can manage our portfolios.
She's pretty good. I gotta say, she's got a good thoughtful attitude about it from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's phenomenal.
A little bit of Bitcoin, but loves ETFs, and we track the. So the thing I did was when we get the statements every month, both banking and investment statements. In the beginning, when she was younger, I would give them to her and I'd say, okay, I would taught her how to read it. And then like after a couple of times, it's okay, if you can read it, I'll double it. So if you could come back to me correctly and tell me like, what was your return, what, for your banking statement, how much interest did you get? If you can come back and like show me that you understand those concepts, then I'll double those amounts. And that motivated her to get good at reading statements and tracking what she's doing. Yeah, so it's great.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dalia. I'm gonna move on to your dad now. So John, you and I have known each other for a little while now. I almost feel like several careers ago. When I first met you, it was in the law firm days when you were doing a lot of directorship work at funds, right? So can you kind of walk us through the different lives that you've had in the finance industry, and
Sure.
What do you think are like common themes between these different really time periods in finance, and also like the different environments that you've worked in?
Sure. I mean, I guess the common theme has been market infrastructure. So I started my career like extensively. I was a McKinsey consultant when I was a kid. That was just because I didn't know what else to do. But I really, my first big boy job was I got a job at the New York Mercantile Exchange, and pretty much right out of business school. And kind of that was an unorthodox decision. Most people don't get their MBA and go work in an exchange back then. But I had met this very charismatic figure who was chairman of the New York Mercantile Exchange. I won a fellowship to go to business school, and I was thanking them for giving me the money to go to business school. And he was there at the event, and he was a billionaire, and he was very kind of impressive. And he was the chairman of the NYMEX, and he was like, I was supposed to go work for Goldman Sachs. And he was like, screw Goldman Sachs, you're going to work for me. And I think back to those days, it was a dumb decision. Like, first person in my family to go to college, much less business school, and I had this job at Goldman Sachs lined up, and then I decided last minute to go work for this wacky billionaire guy. And worked at the NYMEX. I became head of strategy at the NYMEX. I left there to join a hedge fund because that's what you did, trade commodities, and then wound up getting into directorships because there was an investor in my hedge fund. I was a tiny partner, but there was a hedge fund I worked at. There was a investor, big investor, Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. And they liked me, and they said, hey, would you serve on this board for us because you understand derivatives, and we need somebody to understand derivatives. And then it just kind of went from there. So they just kept putting me on boards. And so suddenly I woke up and I was the guy who sits on boards of hedge funds. And that's when you and I kind of met. And my value add there was I kind of deeply understood how these OTC derivatives markets traded. My phone rang about 6 years ago. And I'd written a paper at MIT. I teach at MIT occasionally, and I wrote a paper on the Dow hack. So remember way back when? Remember the Dow hack? So I wrote a paper on that, and that got into the hands of Olaf Carlson-Wee, who's at Polychain. And the Polychain people called me and said, hey, we like this. We like the way you think about this. Would be on our board. And so I got to learn about crypto academically at MIT, but practically with Polychain, where it's a phenomenal organization. Somehow my name got passed through to Coinbase. This was in the earlier days, right when they're starting up the institutional business. And my phone rang one day and they said, hey, they're looking for people who, I'm certainly not going to bowl anyone over at Coinbase with my crypto knowledge, but they're looking for people who understand crypto enough to be dangerous, but deeply understand markets and exchanges, that stuff. And that's how I met Coinbase. So I would say, my back 80%, 90% of my expertise is in market structure and just how to get people to meet on a price. What they're meeting on, the creature that they're meeting on to price is almost irrelevant to some point. It could be a piece of computer code, a bar of gold, or a barrel of dinosaur goo. It doesn't really matter, but I understand how market dynamics create liquidity.
So so you have a very interesting vantage point, right? And so one of the questions that I received from the audience before this was, how do you view the competitive landscape of the stablecoin markets? Do you think it is a situation where the top few issuers will just take everything? And do you think there are any nuances to how that can play out in different sectors of the financial system?
So I do think it's not monopoly, but it's not oligopoly. And when you say take everything, so I do think like there'll be, USDC, Tether, maybe there's room for 2-3 others globally that will dominate stablecoin monetization, because the function of a stablecoin is to really monetize an underlying asset that's extraordinarily, in the case of Tether and USDC, it's US Treasuries. Maybe there's another couple of assets in the world that can hit that level, maybe crude oil, maybe gold. And you take an asset that everybody knows and loves, wants to use, and uses collateral for things, and you make it just frictionless, right? That's the idea, right? Even US Treasuries have friction associated transactions. So I don't see 20 or 30 of those. Now, whether it'll be the same 3 or 5 in 20 years from now, that depends on, well, Tether just had an audit that came out today, I think. So, if one of them were to fail or to start getting squirrely with their underlying collateral, I could see them changing. But I just don't see more than 5 or 7 around the world dominating. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't room for others, because dominating could be 90% of the market, but the market for stablecoins is the entire market for currency. So it's a massive trillions of dollars. So you can have another 100 that are viable businesses that serve little niches, different parts of the world. I just think in terms of how the vast majority of people and businesses will transact, it's an oligopoly, not a monopoly.
Do you think there's a difference between using it for payments, as in like remittances, as opposed to using it to be the de-risk mechanism in a large financial transaction, right? So then the reason I ask that is, when I look at people doing RWAs, right? Like tokenizing traditional financial assets, I feel like there are still so many different ways of doing that, right? I feel like there's so many different ecosystems and everyone's kind of doing their own thing. And to me, it feels very weird because I always think of tokenization as a form of like a file format, right? You put your stuff in a file format, and this file format allows you to do these special things. However, if you keep everyone kind of does their own thing, if you just eliminated the entire benefit of this, right? Which obviously then segregates the different stable coins. So I feel a little bit sad that that's happening. At the same time, you don't feel sad about it, okay?
Because it's not going to last. We're in the creative destruction phase. We're in the anarchy phase. Everyone's trying to do their own thing, and they're all going to consolidate and smash together for exactly the reasons you hinted. You're 1,000,000% right. So I wouldn't be sad at this experimentation phase. I think that's necessary to figure out who's going to win. Because at this point, nobody's figured out. Look, blockchains have lots of wonderful characteristics. Speed is not necessarily one of them, because you sacrifice security for speed, right? So the Bitcoin network's not the fastest network. You're never going to be able to replace Visa with Bitcoin, right? We know that, right? And that's designed because it has to be extremely secure. So if your view is that tokenization should work because blockchains are just naturally a better technology for transferring value billions of times a day, we're going to lose that argument. But as we've seen with things like Hyperliquid and others. There's other advantages to using blockchains, which is efficiency, the ability to fungibility across multiple platforms, getting it into the hands of hundreds of millions of more people that can join the traditional financial network, 24/7 operation. I think they're more cost effective than legacy systems. Obviously, a lot of people will talk about the decentralized nature of it. I don't necessarily believe the average user of financial markets cares as much about that, but for some people they do. So when you factor all those other things together, then blockchains have a shot at being a predominant form of value transfer. So everyone's trying to do their own thing now, but to your point, they're probably going to consolidate because the other option to non-consolidation is you got to bridge all of these disparate markets. Bridges are risky and they slow things down. So I don't see that being a solution. Everyone's going to want to do their own thing for now, and then once they realize, oh, if I switch to this system, whether it's Base or whatever, and I use if I switch to Base and use USDC and get rid of all my other crap, I can transact 24/7, 365 with this degree of latency, and I don't have to worry about bridging and getting hacked or any of the complications. Again, I don't think we're going to wake up in a world 20 years from now where everybody is an extreme expert in how to use cryptocurrency. We have to meet people where they are. They're not going to meet us where we are. And so the simplest solution is one dominant stable coin in my part of the world, and one maybe not one, but two, maybe three exchange marketplaces to transact on. And that's it. That's what most people want because they just want to get on with their life. They don't want to spend all the time. They don't want to go through 50 steps and roll 100 dice to buy a share of IBM. They want to buy the share of IBM at 2 a.m. on a Friday night when they want to buy it. They want that transaction to be as simple as sending people money via Venmo.
So what do you think is the right framework to think about it, right? Like, I think when I ask that question, right, I think the assumption is that the framework is that which letters of stablecoin will have the most US dollar backing it, right? That's kind of the question. But now I'm starting to think like which
letters?
Sorry, like which US based your USD backed stablecoin would have the most volume or just dollar amount, right? I'm starting to think maybe that is not the best way to think about how the market is evolving. Do you think there is like a better framework to think about that?
Well, I mean, by definition, so it's there's two things. There's what you just said. There's how much has been minted, meaning how many fiat dollars have been converted into a digital token that's backed by treasuries for the most part. We'll see where the Clarity Act ultimately winds up if it gets passed at all. But if it does get passed, it looks like the second issue is going to be volume, because interest and rewards be paid on volume, not on static amounts. So both are important. You're not going to have volume without a lot of minting. But in theory, if you had two stable coins with equal amounts of minted value, equal amounts of US Treasuries sitting there backing them, and one is used 50 times more than the other, there's no question that that's the more dominant one. I struggle to see why, in theory, I guess you could have maybe one stable coin that's considered more secure, and that's used to sort of just hoard cash and store it. But if it's not going to be able to earn an interest rate, I don't see the value of that.
Right.
So I think if it's going to be transaction-based rewards or interest, then I'm struggling to see a world where those two metrics aren't connected. Yeah. So, but like I said, I think there'll be two or three of them in most. I think 2 or 3 in the East, 2 or 3 in the West, and then countries will kind of bifurcate around those 2 or 3 in a dominant basis, and then you'll have a whole bunch of niche ones that serve unique communities.
Are you guys positioning yourself and taking actions anticipating that the Clarity Act will pass or will not pass?
I think we're anticipating it will pass. We're just not sure when, but we're not holding our breath. We announced yesterday or 2 days ago the tokenized exchange effort in Abu Dhabi. Obviously that's not something that we just started doing 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago when the Clarity Act stuff started to get wobbly. Standing that for a long time. We always knew we needed an offshore domicile, and obviously it's served as a good hedge because the rest of the world is not waiting around for the U.S. to get their act together. They're moving ahead very quickly, and they're either putting in place legislation or the regulators have the authority to sort of, create rules on the fly. And they're looking to bring in companies like Coinbase. So, that experience of working with the Abu Dhabi regulator was a breath of fresh air. That was the SEC and CFTC have been wonderful since the administration turnover, but they're handcuffed to some degree because Congress won't give them laws they need to turn into rules.
Right. And so, you've been in crypto for a little while now. When you first joined Coinbase, what was your expectation for what this industry would be? And this many years later, how has things panned out or not turned out to be what you thought it would be?
That's a really great question to ask right now because everybody is so miserable. And I mean, I don't even go on crypto Twitter anymore just because it's like my ninth apocalypse in this asset class. The thing is, I remember I was trained on commodities. And so natural gas is where our hedge fund traded. That makes crypto look like, muni bonds. Like this makes this stuff look like baby time products. Nothing compared to natural gas. Natural gas is 100 times wilder, wackier, more volatile, more nuts. So I'm like a zombie when it comes to, like, I walk in and Bitcoin's down 20% and everyone's like losing their minds and I'm just like, where's the coffee? Like, this is boring too. So I think to one degree I'm an economic sociopath. So it helps me like go through this. I mean, this is going to sound depressing to a lot of people. It's playing out exactly as I thought it would. And I'm not saying that to pretend I was prescient. I'm saying that I think I just had a much more realistic expectation. So I joined the NYMEX when it was open outcry, when people were screaming and yelling. Like the movie Trading Places, if any of you are old enough to remember that movie, that was filmed in the floor of the NYMEX. For 80 years, that's how markets priced. And when I joined, it wasn't like 1962, it was 2004. And so it was like 20 years too late to be open outcry, but it still was. And I learned as a freshly minted MBA, I was like, I'm going to change all this right away because this is silly. And then I realized the degree of inertia that exists amongst people, humans. For some of them were bad reasons, I'll be very honest. Some of the floor traders also were on the board of directors and they loved robbing their customers. And like, I'd say 20% of it, 30% was just bad. But 70% was reasonable. These are insanely important systems. So the analogy I always give people who want to like burn everything down and change your passes. Like imagine you get on a plane, and especially me, if you're a nervous flyer, and the pilot comes out and says, great news, everyone, I got awesome news. Like the smartest people in the world have built a brand new jet engine. It is massively better. It's faster, cheaper, safer, everything. It's just better, scientifically proven to be better. And we're testing it out today. You might be like, I believe in science, but you know what? Maybe we test it tomorrow, right? Not on my flight. That's reasonable. Doesn't mean you're a Luddite. It doesn't mean you're anti-tech. It doesn't mean you're, it's very reasonable. So these are insanely important systems, our financial systems. And so the idea that you're just going to build this better mousetrap and it's going to just switch over, it's just crazy. So to answer your question exactly, it is playing out the way I thought, which is, we're winning in a boring way. We're replacing all the plumbing, not necessarily the front end, which I know people want. They want everything to be tokenized yesterday. That's going to take time. Equities work really well. Commodity futures work really well, right? You have to gradually replace those via evolution, not revolution. But the plumbing is slowly being like Hyperliquid. It's an extraordinary story, right? 2 years ago, you could, if you wanted to hedge your crude oil exposure at 1 a.m. on a Friday, you had to wait until Monday morning, 9:30 to do it when the NYMEX opened up with the CME. Now you can do it 24/7. So think about the chance of us going back after that, right? You'll never go back, right? It's like, it would be like expecting us to go watch movies when the movie theaters tell us we can't again, right? It's not gonna happen. So this is all good stuff. It's just not happening in the way I think some of the early adopters hoped it would.
I think people also underestimate the revenue streams that the traditional financial institutions are actually giving up by moving to more instantaneous settlement, right? I mentioned this on Twitter a while ago where Stripe charges me 2.9% plus 30 cents per transaction to collect the membership for the Real Mamas community. And then they hold it in their account. So I see the money I have in the dashboard. Yeah. And they go, hey, for an extra 3%, I'll give it to you now, right? But were you not the person who just helped me collect this payment and then I have to like pay you more money to try to get it earlier, like for you to advance that to me, as a privilege. So I
Yeah,
think there is a lot of that inherent in every single piece of the financial system that are actually all opportunity or
yeah.
revenue
Why would they give
generating
that up?
opportunities, right? They can't get
They're
that
not
up.
going to give this up.
That's
Look
huge.
at perps. Why do you think the future exchanges hate perps or fighting, suing to stop it? I would imagine you sold a product that every couple of months or weeks just died and you had to buy a new one. You forced people to sell your product and buy a new one. How amazing would that be, right? If this monitor I'm looking at right now, if Samsung sold it to me and
Yeah.
every 2 months I had to sell it and buy it back and pay a commission on that, that's awesome. That's a great business model. Then someone comes along with a perpetual monitor that lasts forever. All of those transactions go away. All those commissions go away. I'd fight for that as well. I totally get it. You think the community banks are really scared of crypto? This narrative that like the community banks hate crypto. Complete BS. I'm working with several of them to incorporate blockchain and crypto. They see it as a savior. They don't hate crypto. They're losing money. They're losing people to GSIBs, not to Coinbase. But if you had a business model where the government gave you free money and then you got to loan it to people at 5%, why would you'd fight like crazy to keep that business model? That's an awesome business model. So I don't blame them. I get it. They're lying, but fine. But that's what we're up against. And you're 100% right.
So do you think it's more likely that those people would somehow make the efficiency work, or do you think the newer people would find ways to create inefficiencies as additional revenue streams?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? We had a little bit of audio trouble and I needed to put you on speaker. Can you repeat that one more time, please?
Sure. Just taking a cynical view here, do you think it's more likely that the traditional people would take on these efficiencies and live with it? Or do you think the newer people who are creating these perps would actually expand their business to allow for more inefficiencies and expand their product line?
They're going to have their cake and eat it too. They're all experimenting with this, by the way. All the exchanges are going 24/7. They're running like parallel paths. They're all looking at perps, but they're going to wait until the last possible second and extract every dollar. Again, which is rational. If you were a shareholder in these companies, you would expect them to do that. And if they didn't do it, you'd sue them for breach of fiduciary responsibility. So the reason I started off this conversation saying this is happening exactly as I thought it would is I'm shocked that anyone's surprised. And on the flip side, to your point, you mentioned how annoyed you are at having to pay Stripe that fee. But there are other you could use stables and you could try to you could do very complicated gymnastics to avoid that fee. You're choosing not to because it's a pain. You have other things going on in your life, right? And that doesn't make you lazy, Joyce. That doesn't make you stupid. You're very, very smart. Like I can do my own taxes. I choose not to because I've got a great tax guy I've had forever. And I just don't want to be bothered to learn. And so there's this assumption, I think, that frustrates people in crypto, and not just crypto, but every industry, where we get annoyed that customers don't choose the economically efficient option because we assume that that's what they're all caring about. But a lot of times people don't. I use a financial advisor at Merrill Lynch. I think I could do his job, but I'd have to spend hours doing it. And I just choose to spend that time with my daughter.
Very fair. So for someone who maybe trying to be involved in traditional finance or crypto. I don't know what it's called these days. Something that has to do with digital assets and traditional finance, right?
I'm going to come up with it right now. TradFi. I'm going to call it TradFi.
Please don't. That sounds so terrible.
That's good. TradFi. Yeah, that's it. It's now TradFi. That's it. Set in stone.
All right, CryptFi. First, for someone who wants to get into CryptFi, cringe. What do you see as the like in-demand market skills right now for people who want to get a job in CryptFi?
I love that that's now a thing. I think, and this is my bias, you have to have the functional knowledge, of course, good sales skills. I really think just good communication skills. What I mean by that is not just being a good speaker or not just being able to be a good salesperson and BS with people. It's being able to use all these incredible resources we have now to get smart on concepts really, really fast, and then translate them into a language that TradFi people over 40 understand. And that doesn't mean dumbing it down. It doesn't mean, it's just, that's number one. Number two is, I think, a really deep appreciation for, and this is where functional practical knowledge comes in, like understanding the plumbing as it currently exists and not having the burn it all down mentality. Because yeah, again, like it's inefficient, it's 80-year-old tech, but understanding where it works really, really well. And you have to know your enemy's weaknesses. And our weakness in crypto is we have to understand what our weaknesses are. And some of our weaknesses, some of this stuff works really well. Just because it's 80 years old, it doesn't break. It's got 99.99999% uptime. I go back to my story when I first joined the NYMEX. I remember I went down to the floor one day and it was nuts, screaming, yelling. I remember telling this old floor trader guy who kind of befriended me as a mentor, I was like, this is insane. How are we doing this in 2004? This is nuts. And he looked at me and he went, man, kid, there's a reason the design of the spoon hasn't changed since the day of the caveman. It works. And I laughed, but like, he's not wrong about that. Like, some of these systems are battle tested. And so you got to go with your eyes open. You're going to go in and say, we're replacing this with this other thing. Don't do that, or be ready to explain why, not just because it's a new shiny thing, and be ready to explain why it'll serve that same function. So communication skills, practical knowledge, functional knowledge, and then these days, I think just being a native is super, super, figuring out every part of your workflow, what element of that or outsourced to AI, particularly a place like Coinbase, is very, very important.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, just building out those systems and being able to think in functional steps along the way, I think is very helpful. I myself am trying to figure out how to do that. Actually, I'll show you a funny thing is I printed out the whole like markdown file that I was using in Claude code because
Nice.
I was like, I need to figure out what it is that it's actually saying, and I actually printed it out and took a pen to start marking a Claude generated markdown file for the coding agent.
That's awesome. Make sure every month I run a skill, a timed recurring skill. Make sure you back up your markdown files. A lot of people don't do that. And if something happens, I'll tell you, her younger sister Danny has to use Claude. Claude figured out that Danny was 9 years old and shut me off.
Wow.
Yeah, because she was using it by herself to make a game, and Claude realized she was 9, and it killed my account.
Whoa.
And if you don't have your markdown file, and I got it back, but if you don't have your markdown files backed up, you've lost all that history and all that knowledge.
Yeah, I've been putting it in Obsidian Vault. So having it locally has been making me feel better for that
You're running
reason.
a Mac Mini, you're doing the whole
I do have a Mac Mini.
Yeah.
I managed to get it to SSH into it from my laptop, but then it broke, so now I need to go fix it and see what
I've given up. They get all the information. I don't care. Here's my DNA. I'm one of those guys. I'm totally given up. You say Alexa, 90 things light up in my house.
I don't have that in my
part of
house.
the matrix.
No Alexa in my house.
I respect people who have the energy to air gap everything and use the harnesses and the mixers and all that. I don't have the energy for that.
Yeah, I'm not that extreme, but I try to be somewhat conscious about it. So I'm looking at the time here. I want to make sure we do have time for the audience to speak with you two directly. I do have a couple more questions for you, John. And in light of Collaboration City, right? We are a community of professionals with intergenerational thinking. So I want to actually take this conversation a little bit more on the personal side. I learned that, and I think like before kind of seeing my parents work multiple jobs and kind of going through all of that, right? I don't know if I would have had the kind of just like, I don't know if drive is the word, but just like the lack of stopping to work to just do stuff, right? So I'm wondering like how you think about that with Dalia and your daughters, right? This concept of like instilling grit in your children's mindset, right?
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah,
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, please.
Oh, I'm just saying like, I have two daughters. they're quite young. They're 5 and 10 months. But I think about like they don't have any of the problems that I had growing up. You know,
Yeah.
she is a very fortunate little kid. And so sometimes I wonder like that's not good. That's not a
I
good
know.
thing. It
I
may not be a
struggle.
good thing. So I'm curious
First of
how
all,
you
yeah.
think about that.
Well, first of all, enjoy every second. Somebody asked me, I got an interview the other day, and they had a really good question. They said, who are you jealous of? Never got asked that before. And my response was, I am jealous of anyone with young children at home. So enjoy every second of that. Yeah, no, I struggle with it because especially I'm a softie because I have daughters, and I know my cerebrally, I know that I should give them grit by putting obstacles in their way, or at least not removing all the obstacles. I know that intuitively. But then she looks at me and says, Daddy, and I'm done. I'm done. And I'm just like, I'm just removing obstacles. I was telling a new dad the other day, a little girl, I was like, this is a weird thing that happens, which like for me at least, when they were toddlers, like 98, 99% of their cries are just annoying. Like just like, ugh, the killer. Like just there's whiny, annoying cries. But there's 1% of the time where they're actually scared or hurt and their cry has a different pitch. And then there's a John-shaped hole in the wall. Like I can't even describe your whole body. I think moms feel this more viscerally earlier, but dads, like for me at least, like I just remember that first time she fell out of her bed and like there was like it wasn't like a whiny cry, it was like this different scared cry. And I just remember like I would have run through the door if it was locked. And so that instinct's a hard thing to overcome. I find it very difficult. I often kick myself at night for removing obstacles during the day. But I'll ask you, what do you think? Do you think that I make it too easy for you? What do you think?
I mean, you could definitely, you can always make it harder, but you don't need that.
You know how to manipulate me. You and Danny know you know exactly what to do or say.
I mean, you don't make
You
it
know,
too easy.
I'm trying. It's just, it's challenging. It's very, very challenging. I don't do a good job of that. I'm really, really good about like discipline around working for school. I'm good about discipline about like health and good eating habits and exercise. What do I make you do in the morning?
Or you do anything else, you have to do push-ups.
You have to
And
do what? Say that again?
Push-ups.
Push-ups.
Like immediately at like get out of bed.
Wow.
wake you up, get the blood flowing. I'm good. I'm very, very good about that discipline. Like hyper good about like put your clothes, like I'm on top of her like that. I'm really not good at if there's a problem, like a real obstacle that she could learn from. I want to be the hero. That's not that's not good.
Well, look, from my very short time with you guys, it seems like Dahlia has a great head on her shoulders. I'm not worried about her, so you probably don't have to as well. So, last question before we break for question. You know, also on the concept of intergenerational thinking, when you're gone, John, what do you want your legacy to be for your kids?
It's a great question. Like every parent, you want them to be better than you, and meaning for me that means I want her to be happier and more content than me. Like I just wanted to find her path earlier than I did, I think, and I want her to. Yeah, look. All right. So here's what I want. Here's what I want at the later stages and when I'm gone. I think I told you about my project. That's about my project, Joyce, where I interviewed 200 guys.
You buy drinks for people.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I buy for those I do this where I've been doing this weird thing since she was born, for 13 years. If I'm out at an event anywhere in the world or dinner and I see a father and a grown daughter having a meal or a drink, I buy them a drink and ask them for a piece of advice. Because to me that was always the end game. So not like this stuff's all important, but the end game was always when she's older and has her own life and her own everything, she wants to spend time with me. And so I guess what I would want to leave her with is that took me way too long to realize that's the end game. Like, so I guess the short answer is I want to leave her with better priorities. I want to leave her at a younger age with better priorities than it took shorter time to find those priorities than it took.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John, and Dahlia, for sharing so much in our time together.